keep the handheld, the lab with you, but don't turn it on. I'm not showing like if you turn it on, only one mic can. But so again, like it's still lab 1, 2, but it's not lab 1, 2. It's a 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right.
And then
So mine.
Go ahead.
Check, check. Good.
Check, check. Okay, I think we're ready.
Yep.
I'm going to start. You want to click for me? All right, do it. Perfect. So, obviously, once the sound starts, it's not yet. This is on. This is on. Do you want this to stream out, this pre-show to stream?
It's on.
This is great, man. So impressive.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to FlightSimExpo 2019. All right, who's excited for the weekend? Excellent. My name is Phil. I'm one of the co-founders of the event. It's very exciting to have all of you here this morning. On behalf of myself and over 63 of the biggest names in flight simulation, welcome to Orlando. We're so happy you're here this weekend. A big thank you to Pilot's Eye for providing us with the opening footage for this event. As you can see, we have over 1,500 attendees here today. The support we've received from the flight sim community and the aviation community has been absolutely fantastic this year. Now, I know that some of us have been sitting around for a while for the past half hour waiting for this conference to start. So before we get into it, I want to invite ourselves to go ahead and stand up and stretch our legs. So in a moment, I'm going to have everybody stand up, introduce yourself to the neighbor next to you, and also take a really good look underneath your seat. We've hidden 10 giveaway coupons for Reality XP Garmin gauges. So on the count of 3, everyone's going to stand up, say hello, and look under your seat. 1, 2, 3. All right, excellent. I see a couple winners back here. All right, let's go ahead and take our seats again and we'll continue.
I tried to tell Phil before the show, that does not count as a standing ovation. So that does not count as a standing ovation.
Perfect. Thank you. So now that we're all a little bit more awake, hopefully, we've gotten some exercise, it's time to go ahead and do some of the more boring logistics for the event. No less, they're very important. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to my co-founder, Evan Ryder. He's going to go through some of the more boring logistics, because I know his personality is way more suited to go ahead and do that. So Evan, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you for the wonderful, flattering introduction, Phil. Always appreciated. Last year, for those of you who were with us in Vegas, I was opening the show last year, and I managed to forget the clicker. I had to go back and get it. So Phil says he's not bringing the clicker up. You have to click from back there. So that's what I did. So you're welcome. He's already gone because he knows I'm going to keep making fun of him. Well, welcome, everyone. We are super excited to have more than 1,500 people with us today. They are still registering outside at the front door. For those of you who are standing, there's a couple seats on this side. If you want to make your way along the back of the room there, feel free. We're super excited to just have so many of you guys out here today. As I start, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Phil mentioned he and I are the 2 co-founders of this show, but we have an incredible team of volunteers here with us. Everyone that's wearing these red FS Expo volunteer shirts, we are here to help, just like the FAA. That was supposed to be, yeah, that was funny, okay. I thought that was going to be funny, I wasn't sure. Good, I got there. So we are here to help. We're simmers. We have our own flying setups. We have our own air traffic control setups. We know many of the developers, many of the media personalities that you're going to see. And so if you have questions, whether they be about the show, about your setup, about your flying, we really are here to help. Ask away. We'd be happy to help direct you all the way through the day. The other thing that we want to talk about when it comes to help is Whova. Now, who in the room has already downloaded Whova? And who hasn't yet? That's it? Everyone has got Whova? Wow. All right, we're doing something right. Well, that's good. So for those of you couple who aren't brave enough to admit you haven't done it yet, the app you can find in your app store, download Whova, search FlightSimExpo, use the join code FSExpo19. That will give you access to the agenda, to connect with other attendees, to carpool, to ride share, and a whole bunch of other things over the next couple of days. Now, anyone who's still living in the FS 2004 days, I know you're out there somewhere. If you don't do Whova, the agenda's on the back in paper form. I know you're out there somewhere. We are here in a room that we've called the flight deck. This is our combined room that we'll be doing 2 panel discussions in this morning. So you're here. Outside, right behind you, is the exhibit hall. So through the doors just behind you, you'll see 63 of Flight Sim and Aviation's most committed and engaged developers. And there is some cool stuff out there. There's some really, really neat hardware. I'm sure you're very excited to go out, explore the show floor, and very shortly we're going to let you do just that. In this room at 11:30, we are going to split in half. So right where I'm standing, they're going to bring up an air wall, and then we go to 2 rooms, the left seat on this side and the right seat on this side. And from 11:30 onward, we're going to have 2 concurrent sessions, one in each of the 2 rooms. Again, the agenda's on the back of your badge and on Whova. Most of what happens today in those 2 rooms are developer and exhibitor announcements. They'll be telling you about the latest developments, news, product releases, and a whole bunch of other things that's going on in the world of simulation. The restrooms are located back outside, so when you head out that way, just the way you came in, down the stairs, you'd hang a right. The restrooms are all located just over there. I'm going to talk next about the most important part, that's food. We have breakfast available. You probably saw them setting it up. That will start right after we're done here. It's a cash breakfast. Options range from breakfast sandwiches, oatmeal, that type of thing. About $3 to $9. You can pay for that with cash. And then lunch will take place shortly after. 11:45 a.m., we set that up. And again, you've got sort of $10 options for pizzas, hamburgers, that type of thing. So we encourage you to hang around, grab a quick bite in between your visits to the various exhibitors, and continue on. I said food is the most important part, but I think what's even more important is free food. And we have some of that and some free drinks for you, courtesy of Orbix, at our event social tonight. So at 5:30 p.m. in the exhibit hall just over there, you'll be able to redeem your drink ticket that's located in the back of your badge right here for 1 free drink. And as I say, there'll be appetizers there as well, sponsored by Orbix. So you've got free food, drinking, and flight simulation, or as I call it, Friday night. These jokes just get worse. Hold on a second. That should just say cash, not everyone wants your cash. In other words, pay cash. There are very limited credit card capabilities here. So for the breakfast, the lunch, and if you do decide to go beyond 1 drink in the social, which I'm sure some of us will, me especially, then it's going to be cash. So please do make sure you have some. There is an ATM located out back in the lobby, which is just straight that way, if you do need to pick some cash up before the end of the day. Talk next about what else is available. I mentioned some of the lunch and breakfast options, but if you do choose to go outside of this area that we have for the event, there are 4 restaurants available here in and around the hotel that range in pricing and options. And if you decide you want to brave the beautiful Florida humidity and go out into that outside world, there are a number of really cool things that we've done with this conference. The first one is called Show Your Badge and Save. So with your attendee badge, you can actually save 10 to 15% at over 100 area restaurants, bars, and other attractions, which is a great program that we've got with the local Visit Orlando group here. You can also save money on attractions like golf, zip lining, and the escape room, and you can also look at things like Ice Bar Orlando and a few other cool nightlife activities. Now, all the information about this is on our website, FlightSimExpo.com. You can go to the venue and logistics section, scroll down to nearby discounted attractions, and you'll find all the codes, coupons, and information that you need. And of course, all that detail is also available for you on our Whova mobile app. Parking has been a big question for people, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about this. First of all, if you've driven here but you're staying at the hotel, self-parking at $14 a day is just taken care of through your room key. So there's nothing special. You have your in and out privileges, come and go as you see fit. If you've driven here today and you are going to be leaving at the end of the day in your vehicle, you need to pay for your parking before you leave. That will give you the $14 per day rate. There is a pay station just outside by the registration foyer there. You pay with a credit card or with cash. $14 will get you out. There's no in and out privileges, so make sure you do that when you're ready to leave. And make sure you do it soon, because at the gate, it's $28. So your incentive is go pay now, and it's $14, and nobody waits in line at the end of the day. Hopefully that's good enough incentive for you. I said before that everyone wants your money, but really it's just us who wants your money. And what I mean by that is those beautiful t-shirts that you see out there, as well as there are some shot glasses and some water bottles. That's all available for sale just outside where you came in through those double doors. You can go say hi to Tom, tell him to please stop texting me, and go buy a water bottle. We've also got some combos and discounts available. And before I talk about 25%, who here in the room was with us in Vegas last year? For who is it the very first time you're at FlightSimExpo? Welcome. And now, who in the room is considering themselves to be new or novice when it comes to flight simulation? Okay, that's about what we had. According to what you guys wrote when you registered, 25% of you are new to flight simulation. Maybe a bunch of you were here yesterday and now you're all experts. I could see that. But for those who are new, welcome, and we are super excited to have you. One of the most important parts of this event is reaching out to new people and to people who are interested in aviation, passionate about flight simming, but don't know about it yet. We've all been there. We all remember it. I remember my first time connecting to VATSIM, pressing the mic and saying, hello, anyone here? Apparently that's not how you do radio check. So for those of you who are new, we are really here to help. And we are starting at 10:45 a.m. tomorrow in what will be this half of the room, the right seat. We have a 3-part series on how to use flight simulation. That starts with what do I buy as far as a computer, what type of technology should I look at, what add-ons do I purchase, what hardware do I need. 3 of our panelists are going to go through in great detail how to get started. So for those of you who are joining us tomorrow, 10:45 in this half of the room is the time you'll learn everything you need to know. For those of you who aren't, or if you're just interested, right after this session at 9:30 a.m. today, we have YouTuber Flight Shops as well as CFI Jason Miller on a panel with Pilot Edge's Keith Smith, and they will be talking about their real-world journey through this exact same thing. Flight Shops is trying to get his instrument rating. For those who know him, he's setting up a simulator at home, and he's going to give you the introduction on how flight sim can help, whether you be a private pilot, a student looking to get started, or you're just interested. So that should be a really great panel to kick us off at 9:30 right here in this room. We talked, oh, actually, I should talk about 2020. Anyone want to know where 2020 is going to be? A couple people? Yeah? Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to make Phil do that. He does the hard work. But it will be at 2:30 p.m. in this half of the room. So you don't have to ask me, because we're going to tell you on Sunday where at least we think our 2020 location is going to be. We talk a lot about connections at this event, and I was talking about welcoming new simmers, but another part of this event is introducing us simmers to the real-world aviation market. And that's why we partnered with the Experimental Association, or EAA, to offer every single one of you in this room a free 6-month membership to their association. That gets you a discount if you're going to Oshkosh in a couple months, gets you access to over 300 museums, and 6 editions of their sport aviation magazine. So it's a fantastic deal already included in your registration. Many of you will already have registered and already have taken us up on this option. If you haven't, you can visit FlightSimExpo.com/EAA. You'll be able to register right there, or at their booth, which is all the way on the far side of the exhibit hall. You can register for either the 6-month or a full membership right here on site at the show today. This is North America's community-driven flight simulation conference, and we mean that. After this show, probably by about Thursday or Friday when I've recovered, maybe by Monday if not, depends how many drinks I have at the social tonight, by that time we'll be sending out a survey. That survey will ask you about the venue, about the show, about the exhibitors, and we want to hear from you. We want your feedback so you can tell us what we can do to improve, to change, to tweak, and we use that every single year. So please take a few minutes when you get the link, fill out the survey, share your comments on social media, because we read every single one of them, and they mean the world to us. And you mean the world to us. We are here because of you and because of the community. We're very excited that so many of you have chosen to join us here in Orlando. I'm sure you're very excited to get out on the show floor and see exactly what they have in store. So I'm not going to hold you back any longer. At 9:30 a.m., we do have the panel discussion happening in here. Sessions continue on all day, but at this point, finally, you're welcome to attend, open up the doors, head out into the hall. Have a great show. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy. front, Zach. So I just need 3 lapels. I can take them up there, or you can, whatever you prefer.
Bring them up for you.
Perfect. And then we have, I think you've already given them 2 handhelds, it looks like. Or have we not yet?
I believe somebody took them and then gave them back.
Okay,
I
so
think
we'll
these
just
are
take
them.
those 2, and then that's all we need. So they'll be up on stage with the 3. I've got this one.
Perfect.
I'm just gonna they're all just over here, so you can...
On the other side of the stage?
Yeah.
Perfect.
We're glad to have you.
My mic has been deployed. My bag is over there.
Mic is on. I repeat, the mic is on.
And I got a coffee. All right, you're in the middle, so Keith doesn't attack me.
So I can like shoot both of you guys.
What's that?
I'm gonna be in the middle, I guess, so I can like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have you thought about just asking someone to hold it and film all three, or do you want it to be
I have,
from your
but
POV?
I have a feeling what'll happen is it won't be usable.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a little. Do y'all mind being on a YouTube video? Because you are.
Y'all are live on a YouTube
There it is.
video.
All right.
Well,
It's
not
exciting.
No, we're not live.
live. And a lot.
Okay, so I'm going to shoot this just because we're going to get some cool content out of these guys. I guess to start, who knows who we are? Okay,
Well,
we got some hands. That's good. All right.
That was a risky question.
I do that because then it's worse when you like spend all kinds of time introducing yourself and they already
I
know. So what I do is I make YouTube videos about flying lots of different types of airplanes. I'm not an expert. I'm not a professional pilot. Get a little feedback there. Do I need to talk louder?
Can you all hear that okay? Can you hear us? A little more volume.
Okay, so I'm going to talk louder. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, got to project. So I make YouTube videos about flying lots of different types of airplanes. Actually, can you shoot my intro there? Yeah, thank you. And I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional pilot, but I've found the learning and the process of sharing the learning has been amazing for me to debrief my own flying, and that's kind of what my channel became about. It's called Flight Chops. The goofy mustache is based on a joke, and now I'm stuck with it. So these two guys are pretty cool, different sides of the world.
Every time you pay us a compliment, feedback starts.
It's your fault.
It's a sign.
So we got Keith from Pilot Edge, and we got Jason Miller, who's from the Finer Points of Flying. He's an amazing instructor. That was one of the guys that inspired me early on to really think about putting my stuff online and sharing. And Keith is from the sim world. So we're gonna this panel is gonna kind of create this arc. I'm new to sims. I've always loved them and wanted to get into them. It just wasn't something that I was into. I started flying in the 90s, and I just got my first ridiculous sim set up like 2 weeks ago. We were flying it for the first time.
Yep, absolutely.
So we're going to just talk about how that fits into real flying, and I'll let you guys pick it up.
All right. I'm kind of curious before we start, how many people here are have started their real world pilot training or are already pilots? Can't hear.
Is your mic on?
We lost our mics.
Check 1, 2. You guys got me, right?
Will you ask that question?
So the question.
Check 1, 2.
Check 1, 2.
I might just have to hold the thing.
Yeah.
This isn't
I
uncomfortable at all.
think Keith, you're asking the question, how many folks are actually in real world pilot training flying airplanes?
So we got some hands.
Wow, it's nearly the entire audience. That's great.
Which makes sense, because this talk is how to use simulators in real world training.
Well, it was the introduction to simulators, I think, about home simming, but we're going to fit that context into
Right.
it.
And it was kind of interesting as we sat there, as we're sitting up here and talking about where things could go. It became pretty clear that there's a million different ways to attack the problem, and there are some different opinions on what sims are good for and not so good for. I think that might be an interesting place to start, to kind of dive right into it. Is like the easy stuff is, if we talk about instrument training, for years now, decades now, everyone has accepted that sims are fantastic for certain types of instrument training. And as visual systems have gotten better and better, now you can transition to some of the primary training. But as you work into primary training, and this is what you and I were starting to hit on before, you start running into the limitations of what the simulator can and can't do from a stick and rudder perspective. So I'm kind of curious, I know we have different feelings on this, is what should you be practicing in a sim and what should you be trying to avoid?
Yeah, and you know, it sounds like Keith and I were talking a little bit up front. We might have different views on this a little bit, but for me, you know, it's been years and years and years since I've used simulators in any meaningful way. I fly pretty much every day. I'm flying with students, so I'm in airplanes a lot, and I get to see the results. I look at the student in the left seat, and I ask them often, you know, are you using a flight simulator? Keith's product, Pilot Edge, literally leaped out of the left seat and got on my radar because I would see students come in with 2 lessons, like second lesson, and we would get an absurd radio call from the tower. And you know, in my world, I'd say, don't worry, I got it, I'll answer this one. You know, something like, I want you to cross overhead the field at or above 1,200, make right traffic for runway 30, you're number 2 behind a Cessna, clear to land, and you know, the controller is going on, and I'll say, I got this call. And one day I had a student on his second lesson say, no, I got it, and answered the call, and I literally said, what in the world are you, like, how did you do that? And the answer was Pilot Edge, you know, so I can see as I look in the left seat how the simulator is working for the student. And this is where you and I differ a little bit, Keith, because often I'll see students do this strange thing on landing where they kind of flying the landing like a video game, and I recognize it now and I think, oh, you've been using the simulator to try to land. That's not the way I would use it or the way I would recommend using it. And that's what you're talking about with the stick and rudder stuff.
Yeah, I think we can agree the ATC side. I think we can agree the ATC side is kind of a no-brainer. Whether you're using Pilot Edge or FlightSim or IVAO, any of those networks are actually great for learning radio communications. Different networks have different pros and cons, but generally speaking, if you're doing any kind of ATC interaction in your simulator, I think we agree that's a great place to be. But where it gets a bit more controversial, as you said, is on the stick and rudder side. And I experienced what you're talking about. I had some bad habits when I went to go start my primary training in San Carlos, the same airport that you train at. I had been flying sims for 20 plus years before that, so I had just a litany of bad habits from the sim. And my instructor was very nervous about when we went for our first flight, like, how is this going to go? And he goes, let me tell you right now, you're going to screw up on these 2 or 3 things. And over-controlling and fixation on instruments. Right? He goes, I don't want you staring at all the instruments. It's great that you know what they all do, but you shouldn't know what they do yet. That'll be more for instrument time later on. And so I heard those things, we went flying, and I promptly ignored every single thing he said, and still just kept staring at the instruments. He's like, Keith, we talked about this on the ground. You're wasting your money if you're going to keep staring at those instruments, because I'm not going to let you do that. And I said, all right, got it. So I'd look outside and just slowly back to the instruments again. And so like, damn it. So out he comes with a notepad, and he just covered all of them up. And I'm like, okay, now I have no choice but to look outside, but how do I know if I'm level? How do I know if we're climbing or descending? And he taught me to listen to the sounds of the airplane and feel, you know, you can feel things in the butt of your seat, things that you don't actually pick up in the sim. But the short version is, we fixed that in about 6 to 7 minutes. So if you have an instructor who's very astute about those things and can either head them off at the pass or deal with it when it happens on the fly, as long as you're open to the fact that you might be wrong as a student, you can correct it pretty quick with the right instructor.
Yeah, and you know, I can see that point. I think that what I want people to understand about flight simulators is when somebody comes in to learn to fly, they say, how does this process go? And I always tell them, flying the airplane is the easy part. Yeah. Flying the airplane is 25% of the problem. The rest of the problem is chart symbology, is radio communications, multitasking, procedural training, flow checks, checklists, regulations, airspace requirements. This is what's hard about becoming a pilot. So I just don't want people to skip that step. You know, if you go to the airlines or if you go to the military, they're going to put you in a procedural trainer before they ever let you near a simulator, and they're going to put you in a simulator before they ever let you near an airplane. And so, like, I think it's fine to try to make those connections in the simulator, but I would do it at the very end. There's so much more value. And I know this is hard for sim pilots to hear. I know it because I tell this to my students. I say, here's how I want you to use it. I want you to put it on autopilot. I want you to practice your radio calls. I want you to practice your flow checks. I want to practice check. I mean, I give them a whole list of homework. The next time those students come in, they're flying the video game, and I say, darn it, you've been flying the simulator like it's a video game. So it's tempting. It's especially with all these beautiful displays and all the things you're talking about. It's very, very tempting to just try to fly that thing. But if you're really serious about using it as a tool for training, there's a lot of fruit on the tree before you get up to the branch of, I want to learn stick and rudder skills in this device?
So two things jumped out as you were talking about that. One is what you're describing as a very logical, linear training progression, where you start with the fundamentals, build them up, and then you kind of finish up with the fun stuff, putting it all together, doing the stick and rudder. Right. There's a lot of game design theory out there that says that linear training programs can be a real snooze fest for the students. They make sense on paper, but if it doesn't keep the people engaged, that can be a problem. And a lot of people start with using sims for entertainment. So if you come into it thinking, okay, I want to train as efficiently as possible to become a pilot, that progression is probably the most efficient way to do it, as you just described. But is it the most fun and engaging? And does it capture people who started by using sims for entertainment to begin with? So I think we're stuck with the fact that people are going to want to try and land the plane in the sim. But now they have to have the discipline to say, okay, what I've been doing at home may not work, and it comes back to saying, I need to kind of start from scratch. Not on the airspace and chart symbology part, we've got that cold, but I may have to relearn how to land the plane properly and really listen to what the instructor's saying. So you have to kind of throw out what you learned through self-study and then learn how to land the real airplane, and now you can actually take that back to the sim. So I find that the way I land the airplane in the sim is identical to how I fly my real airplane. And then case in point, actually crosswind landings were a real problem for me in the real airplane. I was doing what my instructor told me, but I had absolutely no feel for what was going on in crosswind landings. So I said, I know we're told not to use the sim for landings, especially cross control can be very inaccurate. So let me give this a try and see if I can understand what's going on. So I just cranked up the crosswind, I think 5 or 7 knots directly from the right, runway 30 at San Carlos. And I started playing with the cross control and really kind of nailed it. And I thought, okay, now I'm understanding what the rudder is for. Now I understand what the aileron's for. This sight picture makes sense. The control inputs make sense. The control loading on my feet was 100% wrong. And I knew that was the case. I know that it takes a certain amount of torque in a DA20 A1 to get the rudder to move when you're at 80 knots. On my CH rudder pedals that are 15 years old, God bless them, it takes about 1/10 of that amount of pressure to make the move. So do not rely on your muscle memory, because when you go to the airplane, nothing is going to happen. You're just not going to deflect the rudder at all. But as long as you're thinking about it in the case of more rudder and less rudder, that tended to work really well. And hey presto, I nailed the landings in the sim, then I came to do it in the real world. And my instructor, just like you were ready to take over on the comms, he was ready to take over when it was a gusty crosswind, and he had us on like a 3-mile straight in for runway 30. And he said, I want you to hold this slip the whole way in. He goes, normally we wouldn't slip for this long, but I want to see if you can hold this slip from all the way out. And I nailed that slip the whole way down. He goes, what changed? He goes, because you sucked at crosswind landings before. What changed? I said, X-plane, I think it was X-plane 9 in the stock 172. Yeah. So if you can separate out the deficiencies of the sim and focus on the fundamentals, I'm adamant that you can actually practice some primary training, some honest to God stick and rudder stuff in the sim.
Yeah, and that may be true, as long as you're not taking too much time up front to work on the 25% problem, right? Like, like looking at Steve, right? So one of the things that you're now set up at home with a simulator. You're about to get ready on your instrument training. And we were talking over breakfast about whether or not the simulator, because, it's no secret how I feel. Really, I'm a don't fly the sim guy. Use the autopilot, work on the 75% problem before you get to the stuff that Keith is talking about, especially VFR. But I'm willing to be convinced that maybe instrument flying is worth actually grabbing the yoke and trying to figure out the relationship between the flight instruments and figure out how the attitude indicator works, and that's all fine. But my advice to Steve, to you, is that's still 25% of the problem. So what I don't want to see you do is get in the simulator and just say, yeah, I can fly this thing because, okay, you've now solved for one tiny portion of the problem. I'd rather see you go on autopilot, learn the procedures, learn how to brief approaches, program the radios. I think you have a great radio setup now at home.
Yeah, I got a pretty awesome panel set up.
No comms.
You guys can hear me? I'm on? Check, 1, 2. I got a pretty solid panel from State Level Avionics. He set me up, John, over there. It was amazing setup with you can hold that for me? Yeah. My issue is that I jump in and out of so many types. I need to learn the Garmin 430 physical unit with the knobs and buttons, and I can't stand using a mouse for that stuff, because in the real plane, as soon as you turn the knob the wrong way, when you got to quickly dial in, you're instantly flustered. So that to me is what I got the sim for, was the buttonology. I want the physicality of it. I want to match up what I'm going to do my instrument flight test in, so I got that set up for that reason. But it's interesting here, you guys have this debate, that's why I'm in the middle. Who here flies real airplanes? Pretty good numbers. Who here thinks it's easier to fly a real airplane than it is to fly sim? Right? So I find it so hard to trim. It's like,
That's my point.
In the sim, I'm like fighting with the trim because the feedback is not quite right. I mean, it's so hard to fly the airplane. Like I can fly a T6, and talking about instruments, like most of the instruments are broken in that thing. So
From the factory, that's how they come.
yeah.
Don't worry, sir, we've pre-broken it for you. It's the high-end model.
So it's all feel, right? Like when I'm flying the T6, it is all feel. I know exactly how fast I'm going. I know when I'm getting mushy. I know all of it because I feel it. So I can't imagine what you're talking about, learning how to crosswind land without that feel. So it's interesting to hear these two sides of the coin. I'm with Jason on the fact that stick and rudder, the sim is fun for that, but VR is cool for that. I feel like if you're trying to fly a pattern, you can really judge like when you're in the pattern, but then I can't see the buttons that I'm trying to.
Well, and I think it's an issue of discipline, right? Like one of the experiences you told me about when you and Keith started, you said, Keith said to me, forgive me, I'm relaying your experience, but you said something like, Keith said, yeah, pick a call sign for your airplane. You said, oh, I want to be Chops 1. And Keith, you drew a line. Yeah. You said, you know what, this is not about.
I threw my mic on the ground. I was so angry.
You're not going to be Chops 1. You're going to be some end number, right? There's a certain amount of discipline required when you're operating in these simulated environments, and I think it's important, to really think that through.
Let's do a play-by-play about that first experience. So I'll get you again.
It's a well-oiled machine up here. No big deal.
I spent so long wanting this type of setup, but not having the time or the energy to get it set up. I was inspired to renovate my office and put like a really solid purpose-built sim into the wall. And we flew it for the first time like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Because I was not going to come here and not have done it. And it was, you said there's going to be a moment where you think of this as a real plane, right? While we're setting it up. And this is like while we're dealing with driver configuration and setting up things. This is not a plane. This is a computer. I'm tripping over setup and configuration. And then we went through that joke of like the call sign needs to be, okay, real call sign, cool. And then we got FlightSimExpo working on the iPad. I think when I keyed the mic and had someone answer me and give me a taxi clearance, I was like, wow. Like I think I say that, like that's awesome.
Right.
There's really a guy there waiting for me to get to the hold short line. And then I started taxiing and then I saw the airplane moving on the iPad. And I was so excited by that I was this guy for a second, filmmaker guy. I started filming the iPad and then I taxied into the grass. and the airplane actually got stuck. And I'm like, oh no. And the controller's waiting for me. And at that moment, what you said kicked in. I'm like, oh, I would not have done this in a real plane, like film my iPad and taxi into the grass. So at that moment, I started thinking of it as a plane, and that only took minutes. And then we did a departure, and we did some formation flying, and it felt very real in my office. And that was really cool, like to be dialing in the frequencies and playing with actual physical buttons. So I can see how, for me, using it as a procedural trainer, immersing myself into my workflow, like put your knee board where it goes, write your clearances down on a pencil, do it all in real time. Don't taxi into the grass because you're filming your lap.
Yeah.
I can see and I don't think that I would have treated it like a real plane if we didn't have Pilot Edge hooked up with a controller waiting for me, knowing that if I sit here taking forever, the guy who just gave me clearance to get to the hold short line is gonna be like, where are you?
If you didn't have an ATC system, you would have started on the runway with the engine running. You would have hit the gas, you would have done a high-performance takeoff, turned around and started doing loops and rolls over the airport. That's what most people would do in a sim.
Probably,
The whole idea of having to look at an airport diagram and process a taxi instruction, that has tremendous training value. If you can expose yourself to 100 different towered airports during your training, then when you go to fly at the 101st towered airport on a long-distance cross-country, it's no big deal. Whereas if you've really only flown out of San Carlos for the past year or so, then you get kind of nervous when it's not your home base. So to the extent you can expose yourself to different scenarios in the sim, that's huge. And I think your point about the technology getting in the way is a really, really big deal. If you find yourself constantly distracted because you can't do something in the sim, or the controls are crap, and you can't trim it worth a damn, if you're getting distracted by the technology and your immersion is in the toilet, you really need to fix that. You have to kind of step back and be objective and say, what is it about this process that is frustrating me right now? Because a well-configured sim should run, it should feel like what you just described. It should feel like you're flying an airplane. For me and my sim at home, which is nothing fancy, it's a $66 set of flight controls, $100 rudder pedals, and about a $2,000 PC, and FlightSim, and 2 screens, one for the sim, one is not for the sim. It's for charts and stuff like that. That's all I need. And I know exactly what it's good for and what it's not good for. So I have a really pleasant sim experience every time. I see people who have not kind of done their own analysis of whether their sim experience is working, and they're always, you say, hey, how'd that flight go? Oh, I had a couple of problems with the sim, the frame rate wasn't right, something was weird with the plane, I couldn't trim it, the radio wasn't working quite right. I mean, they list all these things that are a complete distraction. So you have to be ruthless about that stuff. You've got to get that stuff dialed in so that you can stop worrying about the technology, and for God's sake, stop changing settings in your sim, trying to get it to run better. Like, get it dialed in and then do not play with it anymore. Focus on using it for the training.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I just want to underline that point that these guys are making, that from where I'm sitting in the right seat, somebody watching people spend thousands and thousands of dollars in real flight training, there's tremendous value to what Keith just said. Getting a taxi clearance, looking at a taxi diagram, and processing the route is arguably more important than being able to hold the taxi center line on the simulator. Now, work toward the center line on the simulator, but the real value there is the taxi diagram, the clearance, the briefing, the processing, the habit of doing that. That is going to save you thousands of dollars in flight training.
And I guess to that point also, talking about the cost of a sim, like I know you got your full motion Redbird sim, that's all exciting, a lot of flight schools have those. I did a bunch of instrument training in them, and I got to the point where my instructor said, stop fighting with trim, just put an autopilot on for a second, it'll auto trim for you. Because trying to trim the red, like this is what are they worth, like $50,000, $60,000?
Keep going. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like what I got at home does everything I needed to do because I didn't want to try to trim the Redbird and I didn't want to land it. Every time we broke out of the clouds at minimums, I'm like, cool, bring me back to the FAF or whatever. I'm not gonna spend the next 3 minutes doing this, the rest of this approach. To me, that's a waste of my time with my instructor. I don't care how the Redbird lands.
Right.
And so really, it came down to getting a setup at home that had what I needed. So I think it was a real sim gear. It was the
430.
It's exactly like the real thing, man.
Right.
So
it's a pretty low-cost investment because it is a hardware bezel with a HDMI connection, so a little LCD screen.
Yeah.
And X-Plane 11 is actually driving the Garmin display. So you're not buying a standalone piece of hardware that has a bunch of code and logic in it. It's just a relatively low-cost piece of hardware that leverages what X-Plane already does relatively well. Now, this again is one of those things where do not get too obsessed on every screen of the avionics. You have to understand that some of these avionics have limitations. They're not exactly like the real world. So you will learn 80% of how to drive the Garmin properly, but you're going to have to understand when you get to the airplane, there's going to be a delta. A couple of things will be off. So setting radios, entering the flight plan, loading approaches, executing approaches, missed approaches, that all rocks. But if you want the VNAV mode, if you want to change the data fields, the X-Plane implementation is limited. But that doesn't mean it's negative training. You just have to learn when to cut it off and say, okay, I know that is different to the unit, so I'm just going to have to survive that.
yeah, I'm just trying to get to a point where I'm not, because I don't ever fly it, so I need to not be in the plane with my examiner and tripping over which knob gets me the page change versus which one gets me
Absolutely. Yeah, if they say clear direct to fix, you can get to this point with your real sim gear unit. You'll reach for the flight plan button, you'll turn the cursor, you'll hit direct enter, you'll see the CDI, and you'll look for what that desired track is, and you'll be in the turn in less than a second.
That's what I want to do, because I
seconds.
need to take as many things out of the muscle memory, or put them into the muscle memory bank, and take them out of the front cortex part of your brain. And
Absolutely.
Because that's what kills me in flight training. Anything that you can do in advance. So bringing it back to the T6, I hangar flew that airplane the weekend that I was getting checked out. The weather was not flyable for like the first day and a half. And I hangar flew that thing, and I sat in the hangar and mostly was freaking out because y'all know what a T6 is? Anyone doesn't know? Who doesn't know what a T6 is? Okay, a couple people.
Apparently I don't.
You did, yeah. Jason doesn't know those warbirds. It's kind of the classic warbird trainer. So it's the big round engine at the front. It's sort of a Mustang trainer, 6,000-pound tail dragger, retractable gear, constant speed prop, supercharged radial engine. So there's a lot of complexity going on there. There's a lot you can do to blow it up. There's a lot you can do wrong. It also doesn't get the power quickly, so it's kind of like a jet almost in the sense that if you're low and slow on final, you can't just goose it to add power. Oh. I think it was partly because Mustangs, if you did that, it would flip you over and kill you with the Merlin engine. So it almost worked well in that sense because you learned to add power slowly. But all I'm getting to is that I sat there hangar flying this thing so that there would be no question that I knew exactly where everything is, because that cockpit you just get in and you keep getting in. There's so many knobs and buttons and dials, and it's like really scary in there. And I didn't want, so in the end it worked out that I had 2 days to sit there stressing out and sweating in this thing. Because my instructor said to me, like, I'm gonna be in the back when we're landing, you know, you've got the time, I know you can do this, you're good at keeping the airplane straight, but if you really screw up a landing, like, we're going for a ride. I can't save a ground loop once it starts if you screw it up. So I'm here to be your coach, you're ready to fly this thing, but hangar flying it really got me to the point where I didn't get distracted by where's the gear, or where's the flap handle, or whatever, what I'm looking at, because it's really hard to know where your flap setting is, because it's this lever that is on, it's going down, and then you put it in the middle for lock and back up for up. So you have to like watch these fingers to know where the flaps are, because you can't see them. And I had to know exactly where to look quickly to get them exactly at 10 degrees and then get back to what I'm doing. So having a sim that lets me do that with muscle memory, reaching where I need to reach, turning the knob the way it needs to turn, pressing the button, that to me is invaluable. So I'm really excited that I've got that in my office now. I don't have to spend the money on a CFI, wasting time tripping over that stuff, getting flustered. Because there's this thing that happens in training where you fall down the flustered hill. Like as soon as you start tripping, you just start falling, and then it's like it's hilarious how you're off board. Like that's what I call it. It's like I often ask myself, am I still on board? Right. There's times it's like, I'm not on board anymore. This lesson might as well be over. Because if you've tripped over enough things, you're done.
It's good to call it at that point too. And you know, hearing you guys talk about the Redbird simulators being tens and tens of thousands of dollars, I think there's an important thing, you know, maybe this goes back to the point about discipline, but it may be important for everybody to remember the thing you said, Keith, about if you didn't have the ATC, you might take off and do a high performance thing and do a roll and do a hammerhead turn. So there's this temptation in a simulator to maybe use it like a game. And I think what there is to remember is if you're in the most hardcore place of discipline, like when I went for my ATP certificate, I'd already been teaching for 10 years. I don't have a lot of money. I'm a CFI, and I had to hire a plane that was $350 an hour and an instructor that was $150 an hour. So all of a sudden I'm spending $500 an hour on flight training. Oof. My first 3 lessons with that guy at $150 an hour, we sat in front of a cardboard picture of the cockpit and the POH, and we just went through like 3 hours at a time. I paid him, you know, $450 3 times in a row to read through each one of the checklists, but that saved me so much money. When I finally got out to the airplane and now I'm running this machine that's $350 an hour, the flights, I knew everything that was coming. So I think you kind of have this balance in your sim setup. If you're willing to be super disciplined and super hardcore, remember that the military and the airlines would start you on nothing more than a picture and a checklist. But that's really boring, and not everyone's willing to be that hardcore. So you're looking for some middle ground, right? Get some setup. You don't have to spend $60,000 on it, wherever that line is for you. Maybe the ATC thing is a huge component. If you can get ATC in there, if you can get some of the muscle memory Steve's talking about, then for the purposes of flight training, your investment is complete. And then just have the real POH, the real checklist, and treat it like a real flight. That's the most important part.
One thing that comes up fairly often with people who are transitioning into simming is they become obsessed with modeling their airplane and their avionics. And they think the value of the sim goes from 100 to literally 0 if it's not their panel with their paint job, you know, their tail number. And so much of flying, as you said, is the stick and rudder is such a very small part of it. Whether you're in a 172 or an Archer in the sim, then the process of flying instruments or doing pattern work, the logic is identical, especially if the performance of the aircraft is in the same ballpark. So if you're flying 120 knot piston single, then go ahead and fly any 120 knot piston single in the sim. If you're happy to focus on generic, you know, airspace chart symbology, situational awareness, ATC interaction, briefing approaches, fundamentals of approaches, full approaches versus vectors to final, all of that stuff, it doesn't matter what type of airplane you're in. It's really only if you're trying to work on the flows. So what are my emergency procedures for a 172 versus a Piper Archer? Well, now we are talking about something slightly different. So if you can't find a Mooney 201, let's say flying an M20J in the real world, like a 1970s Mooney, and there isn't a really good one for the sim, don't discount the value of the sim. So maybe you won't be able to practice EPs, but there's like 1,000 other things you can practice really, really meaningfully. Mm-hmm. To the point with avionics, I know how to fly my Garmin 420 in my Lancer 360 really, really well. Therefore, when I fly in the sim, I genuinely don't care if the sim even has a Garmin GPS or not. I'll fly at slant uniform or slant alpha, right? Just the VOR and DME. Because for me, I'm there to practice course tracking and interception, energy management, and multitasking, and the ATC interaction. So I'm not there to practice avionics. So if you can, again, before you get too frustrated and write off the device because it's not your airplane, think about, okay, does it matter? What tasks can I practice with this device meaningfully? And that way you can put the frustration aside because you're not being constantly reminded of the deficiencies. One more thing I would add, if you have a choice between flying your airplane and flying a different airplane, I'll put it this way, if someone put out a Lancer 360 for X-Plane, there's a very strong chance I won't even buy it. I will not fly it because I will be hyper in tune to how my airplane performs. I know I should get 168 knots at about 8,000 feet, 9.7 gallons per hour, and heaven help that developer if it's doing 169 knots, right? And because I'm going to get distracted and go, oh, it's at 169, or God damn it, all right, briefly approach, blah, blah, blah. No, now it's at 170, this is a waste of time, you know? Whereas I'll jump in a Baron, this is a twin, I have no idea how to fly a twin. I'll fly the Baron. I know damn well that this Baron in X-Plane is a full 35 knots slower than the real Baron, but it doesn't matter. So the addiction to having your airplane can actually be unhealthy because you're never going to get your airplane. And even if the numbers end up being right, now you have this weird condition where the plane is right, but the controls are completely wrong.
Right.
The stick forces are completely wrong because unless you spend $30,000 on a dynamic control loading unit, it's never going to feel exactly like the real airplane. So I think it's a fool's errand to practice trying to nail your airplane. I also think the obsession with your own home airspace is another thing that needs to go. People get absolutely hung up on, oh, I can't fly on this network if it's not my airport. Guess what? Aside from primary training, the last place you need to practice is your home airport. You've memorized all the frequencies, you know the taxi route. When they say runway 30 taxi via Alpha, you don't have to look at a chart. You've done that taxi 1,000 times. So I'd encourage you to fly somewhere else. Anyway, I've talked for a lot. So
no, that's okay. I just want to say there's so much value in what you just said about knowing the learning objective. I don't want people to lose that. Like pretty much, everything Keith was just saying is what's the objective of the simulator session. And there isn't a flight lesson I would give or one I would participate in where we didn't know what the learning objective is. And as long as you've outlined your learning objectives, then everything falls into line behind it, like Keith is saying. I don't need to fly my plane. That's not my objective. I don't even need a GPS. So being hyper aware of what it is you're trying to learn in the simulator is going to keep you in focus.
That's a good point, actually. That inspired me to set up my sim as a twin. I got my multi, but I don't have access to a twin. So I set up my sim as a twin with that option with the throttles and the mixtures and the props. What I was most concerned about was having the physical 430 unit.
yeah.
Otherwise, once I've got the rating or finishing flight, I don't care to match any particular airplane.
Right.
So I'll fly a twin around and then work on that and do some single engine approaches and stuff like that and use it for what I won't be typically doing, because why try to replicate what you're typically doing? And yeah, you're right, you'll never get it. I guess we should throw it to questions. Is there anything we didn't hit?
I don't think
so. Let's hit questions,
10
I guess.
minutes per question.
Perfect.
Yep.
We got about 10 minutes, guys.
Okay, so Mike guys are going to find you, and they'll be the ones that choose, I guess. So yeah, there's a guy in the front here, but Mike guy is over there.
I got a question.
Okay, we got one here, so he'll get to you.
Yep. All right, so this is Richard from Louisville.
I was just wondering, when did Pilot Edge start? And Air Manager, I've heard about that. Any comments or thoughts?
I heard the first part of the question, when did it start? So Pilot Edge started October 1st, 2011. And it's been operating 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for those that aren't aware, there are different ATC networks out there. And Pilot Edge is, the way it's distinguished is that it's a subscription service, you pay for it, and we offer the ATC 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, covering the western half of the United States. There's about 85 towered airports. So the difference between that and other networks is when you go to fly on Pilot Edge, you know that there will be a controller there or not. What was the second half of the question?
He wanted to know a little bit about Air Manager.
I couldn't hear that, I'm sorry. Oh, thoughts on what?
Software, Air Manager.
Air Manager?
Air Manager
software, have you heard of it?
I'm not familiar with it.
All right, guys, over here we have Mike from Peoria.
Yeah, I'm just kind of starting down that road of trying to figure out, if I want to learn to fly and, how I want to do that. One of the ways that I'm doing sim, I'm doing X-Plane and I'm doing it in VR. Now, of course, you've got your touch controllers. It's hard because you can't see physical controls, so I'm not really using an actual flight yoke and rudders and all that. But I just wonder, what you guys think about the value of doing that in terms of muscle memory. Where you don't have the physical components that you can feel and touch, but in terms of you can look around in that cockpit and learn where things are, even though you're not grabbing them with your hands, versus using physical controls or setting up a physical cockpit that might not match the plane that you're flying.
I think a lot of that for me is how diligent are you being about the procedures. Like, so if you have a POH for a Cessna 172, for example, and you've got a climb checklist, a cruise checklist, a descent checklist, and a before landing checklist, and let's say your learning objective for your simulator session is to develop good habitual use of checklists, right? Then as long as you are being disciplined and on each and every climb, regardless of whether or not you're flying the thing or it's on autopilot or whatever, if the objective is to get good at checklists, as long as you're kind of going through the motions and reading the checklist, I don't think it matters much if you're touching things or not. You're going to make a lot of progress toward meeting the objective of that session, right? So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on it.
I'm violently opposed to VR right now for the type of training that you're talking about. I hate to say it. VR is incredible. It will become the thing in the future as you're able to manipulate the controls really efficiently. Right now, in a Cessna 172, when you want to go flick a switch, you don't shoot a laser at it, right? If that's how Cessna 172s worked, we'd be golden, because that's how VR works right now. You're using a pointer to go on all the things that you need to manipulate. At least that's what I've seen so far. And it becomes distracting. Oh, that's interesting. The stuff that I've seen, they're not moving the pointer towards it. They're just shooting a light at it and are able to manipulate from a distance. I see. Gotcha. Even so, I think some of the detailed manipulation of some of the fine-grained controls, like the concentric knobs for a radio, you're going to learn these. You're going to love having that real sim gear. Nothing's better than having those concentric knobs that have 5 functions: big knob up, big knob down, little knob up, little knob down, and cursor.
Yeah,
trying to do that in VR is a nightmare. So I'd rather dispense with the VR and have even just a mouse to be able to manipulate it, or physical hardware, because physical hardware is much faster.
VR, we did some formation. So Dave, my Warbird buddy, who built he's the guy that checked me on the T6, and he's also the guy that built my PC. He's like this guy that crosses all the worlds. He's got a really cool VR setup, and we did some formation flying with one of his buddies in Warbirds.
It's amazing for that.
Wow, dude, this is exactly what it's like. I'm looking at the plane, I'm adjusting throttle, I can tell when I'm in or out of position. So VR was amazing for that, because I didn't have to move my hands. It's what it's like in a real plane. You don't really look at the cockpit much in the real plane in formation. I mean, you're listening if something's going wrong, but you're not going to spend time looking at your instruments. You're glued to your lead.
It comes back to the task that's being trained. So VR excels for formation flying. It sucks for like checklist. How do you even bring the checklist into the sim? It's doable, but it does require a lot of technical knowledge and charts and things like that.
And my feeling is, I would just argue that a little bit, saying that from where I'm sitting, it's consciousness about the checklist that's typically deficient. Like when I see pilots in the real world, in a real airplane, I have to remind them, what about your climb checks? Oh, right, I have to do a climb checklist. So it's just the habit, the ritual of it, the standard operating procedure. And it doesn't matter to me if it's VR or if it's a mouse or if it's a keyboard. Best case would be hardware, but if you can't have that, if the objective is to develop good habits, you can get it done in any of those environments.
So we got this one right here, real quick,
I probably misunderstood something you said. My understanding is Pilot Edge gives you experience with air traffic control and charts and all the technical aspects. And you had alluded earlier to the fact that flying a real airplane is a lot easier than flying a simulator, which I agree. How did it improve your stick and rudder skills, or did I misunderstand you?
So the question is, how did the simulator improve your stick and rudder skills fundamentally, right? That's what you're asking? Pilot Edge. So I don't think, from my perspective, I've only begun, but I can already see that I don't think it applies at all to stick and rudder skills. Pilot Edge is all about situational awareness. So
and it loads up your ability to multitask.
That's what I'm saying. So for me, I want to be more comfortable with ATC. I want to be more comfortable writing down my clearances. The things that trip me up in the plane is not flying it. It's when I get a big giant clearance and I'm like, and I'm quickly reaching for the, write it down. And then it's like, read it back. Okay, now get it in. That's what I care about. And
I have to agree.
Whatever you want to call that, situational awareness or being on board.
Well, there's so many. I mean, again, if the objective of the lesson is multitasking, the minute you put another human on the other end of the line, all of a sudden there's an urgency to respond to communications, which loads up your, what I call your processor. And like the guy said, like Jason said before, the
navigate, communicate.
That
so communicate comes last.
Yeah, communicate comes last. So if you're practicing that, or your ability to just process things. I mean, there's that joke about there's a time and instrument flying where I'll ask you what your name is and you say stand by because you can't think about everything. It's thinking about everything at once that's part of the 75% problem, right? And flying the airplane is so task saturating that's a danger, I think. That's why I would say to you, great, learn how to fly the airplane, but do it last, because if you think to yourself, I'm going to learn how to fly the plane in this sim, and you just start flying it, you're already pinwheeling your processor. You're not going to have a lot of room to understand all the other stuff that's going on.
I would agree that it's not going to affect your stick and rudder. The only thing we might do is put you in positions which you wouldn't have put yourself into. So we might tell you to either extend your downwind, or we might say, hey, can you make a short approach? Because there's a King on a 4-mile final, and you're being the numbers in a 172, or a couple say, hey, can you do a short approach? Maybe if you were practicing by yourself, you wouldn't have done the short approach. And so now you're actually looking out the window, pulling to idle, getting the flaps out, maybe slipping. So maybe you're getting to practice maneuvers you wouldn't have practiced as much, but that's almost the stretch. By and large, it's really not going to help your stick and rudder.
All right, guys, we got time for about 2 more questions.
Yep.
Hey, this is Tim. I'm brand new to this community. Mike Victor Yankee is my home airport. And, you know, I'm an ex-planer. I'm starting to make that transition towards, you know, basic equipment and, you know, just someone who's new to this community. Who are some of the, you know, walking around this expo, who are some of the key stakeholders that I should be talking to, say top 5, or, you know, just as I assess the options from an equipment standpoint?
I don't think it would be fair for us to pick out one particular vendor here. There's some great stuff, and a lot of it's stuff I have never seen before, and I've been in this space for a while. It's not a massive show floor. You should go by every booth and then ask to see what it is they do, and think about how much does it cost, what's the ROI going to be, and does it work for the tasks that you're trying to train. So if you're a G1000 guy, you may be a candidate for buying a beautiful G1000 piece of hardware. Don't buy a G1000 thing if you're learning in a Garmin 430 or 530. So there's great flight controls, there's great avionics, there's great simulator manufacturers. I wouldn't want to pick out a single one necessarily, but there's really good stuff out there.
I think, the main thing is think about what you want to achieve, but also what is your setup at home. Like, I originally was going to just put a small setup on a desk beside my editing suite. Very quickly that all changed. So I'm editing the episode right now about what I went through to build the sim that inspired me to actually renovate my studio, and where I had a bunch of useless shelves, I ripped them out and built it into the walls so that it's kind of a pretty awesome purpose built. So when I pull up to it, I feel like I'm going to the office for a minute, like the airplane office, not my studio. And so make that decision for what your setup needs to be personally, because I'm new at it. I made the choice for real sim gear and stay level avionics to help me set up the system with the hardware, but it's going to have to be personal for what you want it to be.
All right, our last question is from Steven, and it's about simulators and IFR currency.
I can ask, this poor guy in the middle he's been doing such a good job with his right hand. If you want to talk afterwards, we'll be available.
I got it right here. Hold on, sir.
Go ahead. Just the look of sadness each time when he put his hand down, crushing.
I'm kind of the sniper in the jungle, left seat 7675 driver. One of the things that flight simulation does, as far as on the PCs, is your situational awareness and also anticipating what's coming up, especially if you're operating in an ATC world like Pilot Edge, and learning that, hey, next thing coming up could be vectors, or you're setting the airplane up to land. You guys really didn't touch on getting ahead of the airplane, which when you're flying, especially on the PCs, anticipate what's coming up, what you need to do next. As a check captain, I see that all the time. Some guys get situated, even in the real world, like going into Kennedy, things like that. The important thing is understanding what's going on, what's coming up next, because once you get behind the airplane,
it's over.
You're in the swamp and you're bailing.
Yeah, and I would definitely put that in the 75% category. That's definitely one of the things the simulator is great at doing. You guys have any more?
Yeah, I'm new to simulation, but I've been a pilot forever, and I know the FAA has recently allowed us to use some type of flight simulator to stay IFR current. Is there anything that we can do at home, or is there anything coming that we can do at home to use that technology?
What qualifies as an AATD? 'Cause
That's a
you
good.
can use those at home.
You could go with BATD. If you have the idea that you could take your PC at home and add some hardware to it, and now you can shoot approaches with it and stay current, that's not how it's going to work. You need to get an approved device. The price tag on those approved devices is significant. You'd have to look at, okay, let's say it costs me $12,000 to acquire a BATD that is of actually, frankly, a lower quality in terms of the experience that it delivers compared to a $2,500 PC at home. Okay, I'm spending all of this money. What is it actually getting me? Okay, it's saving me doing 6 approaches every 6 months. Okay, that's like 7 years of currency that this is costing me right here in this one-time purchase. So it's going to take 7 years. I'm using that number randomly, but you get the idea. If the break-even time is so far in the future, just go do the approaches in the airplane. Even if it's the same 6 approaches, that's what I do at this point. I shoot 6 approaches that are the same approaches. I do it the wrong way. It has almost no training value. I shoot 6 ILSs at one airport, do my hold, and I come back home, and now I'm legally current. Was that the safest thing to do? If that's the only thing I was doing, that would be a disaster. But I'm actually supplementing it with a non-certified sim at home and crushing it, doing 6 or 7 approaches a month that I'm taking really seriously, and it's really diverse and varied. So until the price tag of BATDs come down, I would say I would not, unless you're just flush with money, I'd say it's out of range. They're priced too high.
Yeah, and in case anyone doesn't know, that's Basic Aviation Training Device, right?
Yes.
So that's an FAA acronym for an approved simulator that you can use for currency.
But I think the main point there is how can I quantifiably use it in a way that can go into my logbook? And I think the question that was brought up over here of getting ahead of the airplane is what it, and I guess I'm glad that you specifically used those words. That is kind of what I was talking about falling down the hill of being off board. This is what the sim is good for to me. I don't care about logging it, and I gotta be honest, my logbook's a bit of a mess because of all the things I get to do. I'm not even caught up on what I should be logging probably, but I don't care because what matters to me is what I'm learning and what I'm taking to the next flight. How safe am I? How current am I? How recent am I? Obviously I'm gonna stay current legally, but I feel like the legal minimums are not really safe. So these types of tools that help you learn to stay ahead of the airplane because you're at home, I don't care if I'm not able to log it. What matters is when I get into that airplane the next time, I feel more prepared, and that's what these tools are doing for me, and I'm really excited about it.
I'd like a 10-second follow-up is, if your question is, should I get a certified sim? If the answer is no, then what's the value of the sim if I have access to a real-world airplane? If you have an hour and a half to spare, you cannot do diddly in a real airplane by the time you go door to door. With 90 minutes, I can be productive for 87 of those in the sim. So for that alone, it's a very productive tool.
And I think we all agree on that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Our,
you did good, man.
our next presentation will be an add-on development panel. It'll be starting at 10:30
You actually turned me
in
around
about
on it.
10 minutes.
What's that?
You turned me around on it.
Everybody, we're going to start our next panel. It will be a flight sim developer panel hosted by Twitch streamer Chili Willies, and I'll let him take it from there.
Is this thing on? Sometimes I wonder if microphones are going to work. Hi, everyone. My name's Will. I'm Chili Willies. I'm a content creator on Twitch, and I've put together some really smart people that are a lot smarter than me. Some of them, I swear, they have like 3 PhDs. I don't know how they like learned what they learned, but it's pretty great. So we're going to pick their brains and see what we come up with. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Is this on? Yeah. I'm Stephen O'Connell. I'm from Navigraph, Stockholm, Sweden.
Andrew Heath from Positive Control, the new network. We're not released yet, but I'm from Philadelphia.
I'm Kevin Menard from Old Prep Solutions from Montreal, Canada, or Toronto, depending on who you ask.
I'm Bill Womack. I'm the owner of iBlue Yonder Studios and the lead, or not the lead, the senior developer with Orbix.
And I'm Sasso. I'm with Hotstart, developer of the TBM, and working on a Challenger now. And I'm from Slovakia.
Oh, wait. Oh, never mind. Okay. So I'm going to start off with something from kind of Developer Month. You guys might remember that FSLE did a thing called Developer Month, but I think it's kind of a good segue. So what motivates you guys to do your work and keep you going? Whoever. Just jump in.
Start. So I'm primarily by training a software engineer, but I have an extreme passion for aviation. So I guess it was just a natural progression to combine the two together. I used to work in completely a different software development environment, but since then I've transitioned over to combining my passion for software, for making software, and for aviation, I guess.
All right, we'll put on one. Honestly, I've been doing this for about 17 years now, doing scenery design, and I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. I try to imagine sometimes something else that would be more interesting, more fulfilling, more challenging. Haven't come up with anything yet, so I just get up every morning and keep doing it.
I'm kind of the opposite of that. Sometimes I just go and start thinking in the shower. I'm like, well, it wouldn't be cool to have that. What's already existing is not super nice from what I like, and I'm like, okay, let's try to draft something up and come up with something, and then you end up with chase plane, right? So I just start coding, and it just keeps going. I forget about eating, I forget about sleeping, and then you end up with a product. So it's kind of good for me, but I can't stay still. I just can't stay still. I do visual effects, I do camera systems, and something else, who knows? But yeah, that's what motivates me. Yeah, and the feedback, obviously. Just coming here, I learn more about myself and the product that I make, and what I should be doing, than what I would think. So people give me feedback, and that's awesome.
So my profession is an airline pilot, and to come home, I de-stress by controlling on online networks. And which seems really weird, but that's what I do. But so I come home, and I've been doing that for 20 years, and I wanted something better, something that was more realistic. So I decided to create my own network, and I've been doing that for the last year and a half. It's been a lot of work, but it's fun. It's a good experience. So.
For me, it's the feedback we get from all the users through this event, from forums, from just talking, getting feedback, and understanding what features are important, and delivering those, and hearing comments, and just progressing from there. I mean, this is really driving me and everybody at Navigraph forward, and it's great.
All right, so you guys were talking about how you come to events like this and you come up with ideas for improvement. So how has your relationship with the community evolved over time, and how has it changed your development process?
Well, for Hotstart, we were always kind of pretty heavily community driven. So when I started the first project that we were working on, I was pretty Like there was a time of secrecy of maybe 3 or 4 months afterwards. It pretty much got announced, and it was just being developed sort of in the open, so everybody knew what was going on. The community is extremely valuable in that they provide feedback when they see something that's wrong, especially early in development. They can provide a lot of positive info and what to be changed, what needs to be added. It's just when you're developing a product in a vacuum, you sort of insulate yourself from, then you can sort of put yourself in an echo chamber, especially if you got multiple people talking to you, where they can just turn into a bunch of yes men and just driving you in a bad direction. You end up somewhere where you just don't want to be. So community interaction for me is absolutely super duper important straight from day one of development. When somebody says they want feature X in a product, then like, who am I to disagree? I can have a vision, but if a lot of people think that what I'm doing is wrong, I just got to change it, because it's really ultimately about making people happy, I guess.
You know, I can relate to the whole developing in a vacuum thing, because that's where I spend, honestly, about 95% of my time, sitting at home in my own office with no one else around. But events like these are really invaluable, because I know I came back last year from the expo with all kinds of great feedback, features people wanted in my products, new areas they wanted covered, airports that I hadn't really considered. And they gave me some great ideas, and some of those are even kind of becoming set in stone as part of a product roadmap for the next couple years. So the community is invaluable, and I love them. I mean, this is a really great community, so I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Where do I start? The community, in terms of developing a product, I think is the most valuable and most underused thing there is in this community right now. Chaseplane was developed from the start to be released as an early access product. We did that. A lot of early access early access is not well seen from most people, because usually what happens is they start developing it and then they abandon it, and people paid for it. They paid for a complete product. So Chaseplane was kind of released in a very early stage with a very clear intention of it being developed with the community. And the result was absolutely incredible. And the feedback that was provided from the community and the changes that we've made according to those feedback is just absolutely incredible. And I can't think today of a way to develop the product without involving the community from the start at a very early stage. Because naturally, the progression with those feedback, you'll end up with a good product if you follow what the community feels is right and what the majority is voicing. So, yeah, community is a great, great thing.
Every idea or feature that we've come up with at Positive Control is an idea or feature that somebody else has suggested. I mean, with the community, we're trying to create a community with Positive Control. So you basically have to listen to them and figure out what the pain points are for users and try to solve those issues. It's actually quite interesting to try to solve an issue and to see how can we make it the most realistic as possible. Can we automate it? If we can automate it, we eliminate a lot of unnecessary work, busy work by people. So everything's community driven. It's so important for us, at least.
So Navigraph started out from actually being a request from the community, which we touched on yesterday for those who attended the Captain's Corner. This was like a request that came into the SAS flight support group where we were doing other work. So initially, the community was like the kickstart for Navigraph. But then early on, we didn't even have a forum. We weren't that exposed to the community the first years. Then this has really evolved over the years, and now the community is like the center core of what we do. From the community survey that we did the last few years, last year we had 15,000 respondents responding to various questions, 77 questions regarding various aspects. We hope this attendance will be even higher this year when we do this. When we do beta testing, we invite pretty much everyone that wants to be involved. We had over 5,000 users testing our latest apps. So the community is really at the essence of Navigraph.
Yeah, so you guys are talking a lot about like early access, and so something that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on is when do you think something is ready for the public to get their hands on it, and do you think early access is effective, and why is it effective or why is it not effective, depending on like your circumstances, right? Because you're all doing different things.
I think early access is good in terms of if you're clear what this really is and what is expected from the user and from the app itself or what you're testing. Absolutely. I mean, early feedback to know that this is in the right direction or this is good to go is definitely a good way.
I'm a new kid on the block here, so I'm kind of going off of what other people have done in the past, and I'm hoping that we added a managed release plan so that people could have access to our software earlier than just opening the floodgates, because we're not prepared to open the floodgates, and I think that going by Navigraph and various other companies, the way they've released things in the past, that's kind of what we're trying to model off of, so that we don't get into a point where we're opening up and we can't support issues that are arising. It's really a staffing thing too, to make sure that we can to solve those issues as they pop up. So
I think it's kind of simple. If you have less than 10 tickets a day, you're good for release. Very simple. If you have a public early access beta and you have a lot of people using it, if you see that the amount of bug reports that's coming in is very manageable, I mean, you have a stable product. Essentially, that's what it means. So you just go and release.
I think a lot of it comes down to intent with an early access product. And I'm speaking, of course, only in my little realm of scenery add-ons mostly. You don't see a lot of early access for good reason, I think. But I've seen people release products that I felt like were sort of rushed to get them out the door so that they could make enough money to keep developing it, which is not the best motivation, I think, to do it. And that's where you get a lot of things that get abandoned after the early access before they're actually complete. But on the other hand, the most recent product that I worked on with Portland International, we knew that we weren't going to be able to provide the airport in its actual current 2019 state when we released, because it had just barely finished construction on some new features. There were no photographs available to us at the time. And so I had to kind of make a call. It's like, okay, we have the airport in its 2017, 2018 configuration, looking good, working well, more or less bug-free. Do we release that and then update it as time goes on? And we decided to do that just because not only do you get a product that we feel like you could enjoy now, but you buy something and then later on you get more goodies. You get things added on as they get updated. And I think that actually ends up being a positive. Is that early access? I don't know. Technically, maybe not, but it's the same idea.
I think a scenery is always a bit early access, right? And it's in its form, because following up to real life is a constant struggle, right? Google Earth has been doing it for over a decade now. They're not done. They're still early access.
Yeah. I mean, you could chase your tail forever with it and never be done, and that's the glory of it, I guess.
Yeah, so for early access, it really, I would tie on to what Bill said, is really it's about the motivator for why a developer does early access. If they're doing it to catch bugs or get a little bit of extra exposure, sure, for that kind of point, we can totally see early access. And it's really, for software projects, getting a sort of, I'd say a good approach is a staged release cycle, essentially. You might call that early access, in that, say, for instance, we can have 10, 20 testers, but if everybody there has powerful hardware or has a particular sort of slant to their configurations, we might not be able to catch all these sort of corner cases. So I can totally see doing a couple hundred people in sort of a limited early access. But yeah, if the motivation is just to make money and just to keep the software house going, then something else is wrong with the software house. Something needs to be looked at. Why your finances are not working out? Why you are not able to actually finish the project on your own? But yeah, for testing purposes, I totally see early access as a good thing in a limited scope, not just to throw it out there as an incomplete product and to just abandon it.
The weird thing with early access and developing with a big, kind of a public early access is you can have 1,000 users using a product. No issue, you're good, go for release. The 1,001st user will have an issue.
I mean, you always are going to find those unlucky guys who are just, you're going to have 100 people, no issue whatsoever, and then one guy comes along and he just steps into it on every single step. His machine will crash, it'll blue screen, it'll do something different, something weird, the stars are not going to align right, and he just has issues.
I think that's universal.
Pretty much every software project has seen that.
So what do you guys think is a skill that you could take from either past work, if you came into flight simulation like from another career, or just that you've learned as a developer that is helpful?
Well, it really depends on the type of project that you're working on, right? Because if you're working on scenery, you want to be an artist. You want to have the sort of feel for color or for composition, or an eye for detail and visual in the visual department. If you're working on an aircraft add-on, if you're working, again, as an artist or a sound designer, you want to have a good sort of background in the respective field. If you're doing software, I mean, the best approach is to already be a software developer in the first place, right? So if you have, 10, 20 years of software development under your belt, then, doing software add-ons for a simulator is really no different than doing it for any other project. That's at least fundamentally. Of course, the best way is to have like gaming development experience, because then you're used to real-time programming and that kind of stuff. But I'd say it's really nothing special in flight sim than it is for any other sort of software vending field. You just got to know what you're going to be doing, and if you don't know it yet, there's tons of tutorials out there. So just go wild and learn.
It's less a matter of specific skills sometimes than just an inclination. Like, I started off as a photographer way back eons ago. And so I got all these photo skills, and they transferred to digital photo skills. And I had a lot of web development experience. And that led to art, strong art skills, but also a familiarity with code and with coding. Not, hardcore programming, but certainly being able to work with XML files and things. And all of that stuff kind of feeds into the skill set. So having an artistic and a technical bent put together is really ideal for a lot of aspects of this hobby, I think.
I learned programming specifically to build my products. I didn't know nothing about it. I was doing very basic web design, web stuff, and then the way I look at things, when I want to do something, when I have an idea on what I want to do, I start to break it down and take the required steps to get there. So I got good at programming. I'm still bad at administration, so I'm still late on my taxes. But I do great software. So you win, you lose, right? But it's all about what you want to do and taking the steps to get there. And in that term, I learned how to program. I'm very happy at it, actually.
So I'm not a programmer. I'm just the manager. But I started online networks 20 years ago when I was 16. And I think that having the experience of working with and being an administrator on those has really helped me. The airline pilot thing actually helps a lot, but it's more like I did a lot of sector development and SOP development through my time online. I think that actually has really helped me to understand what people are used to seeing, what they want to see, and hearing the feedback over those 20 years has been invaluable. But that's really what I think has helped me the most is listening to people and trying to solve the pain points. The airline pilot thing is helping because I can say, well, that's not how we do it in the real world. Let's see what we can do to make it more realistic.
I was just going to chime in. Well, you say hopefully not, because I flew into Tampa and it was a flight sim newbie level plunk, like all 3 gears coming down at the same time. I was wondering like what airline I was on for a minute, but.
Are you talking about the holding that was going on?
No. I was already in, but just like we came in and it was really hard. It was a really hard landing, and so I was just.
It happens. I was holding, which is very interesting. I think a lot of people love the holding online, which is funny because we actually make more money if we hold, so don't tell anybody. But, you know, I think a lot of people love that interaction of holding and having that realistic experience of a airport closing down is very fun sometimes. People like it. In the real world, they try to solve that by having a ground delay, absorbing the delay on the ground at the airport, but people don't like that online. They want to get it going, have a bunch of fuel, and just hold. So it's interesting.
For me, I'm not even a simmer, I'm not even a pilot, but I'm running Navigraph. At core, or the important part is to try to assemble a team, because it's very, very hard to have knowledge about every aspect of a product you're making. Front end, back end, concepts, the sales, management, support. I mean, you try to be good at everything, but it's very hard. So if possible, find people that you like to work with that are good at, everyone is good at different things. And the combination, the constellation, it's really 1 + 1 is more than 2. So this is what we're doing in Navigraph.
Okay, so we're going to kind of switch gears a bit. So what are you guys excited about for Sims that you think is coming soon or in the future? So, like, what do you think is an innovation or something that will happen in a major flight sim platform, or both, or many, or however many there are, right, that is going to be really important to a lot of people that you're excited about?
I think VR is definitely coming more and more. This is something that we're excited about. I think, I mean, Navigraph, we're not really tied to any platform, so we're really adapting to whatever is happening and adjusting to any mode that the simmer is using to interact. So VR is coming. We started supporting some virtual EFBs to do this. Apart from this, we're running standalone apps. So we're not really looking forward to some paradigm shift or so. It won't really change how we work. We're closely following and monitoring what's happening, of course.
I think web browsers, accessing a web browser in the sim is something that I would like to see. I think X-Plane had considered it. I know that Flight Factor has one in the Airbus. I'd like to see more of those because our web UI actually is accessible through any mobile device. And if you could pull that up, you could just, in VR, you could just look over at your EFB and control your connection status, CPDLC and radios and all sorts of different things. I think there's some security issues they're working through, I've heard. And controlling scenery in a simulator real time, X-Plane can do it. I'm not sure about P3D, but we could turn off lights and turn on lights and turn on brightness. That would be really cool for a controller to do.
I think there are multiple avenues where this could go. Depending on what field you're in, you'll use different simulators. For training, you'll use VR. For home simulation, VR is fine. I do think that you can make a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun with VR, but I think if you're making a long haul for 8 hours, VR is not the thing. So P3D X-Plane still, I think, is kind of the most important platform for those specific purposes. You have Aerofly, you want to do VR. You have in-browser sims kind of becoming a thing too. We've seen Google announce a cloud solution for games. Obviously, P3D or X-Plane is not on there, but eventually, you know, it's something that people can entertain. It could be something that's self-hosted somewhere, and you don't even have a load time, and perfect frame rates all of the time. Another thing is ray tracing. Who wants ray tracing? I woke a few people up in the room. One day I'll come to our sim. That day will be incredible, especially for scenery developers and aircraft developers. So there's a lot of avenues it could go, but like it's really too early to tell where that's going to be, right? At the previous expo a few years ago, I think we had a very similar question, and the result was, we still don't know. It's completely different from whatever was discussed back then, and it's going to be different in 5 years than what we're talking about right now.
I want to say that VR is going to be important, and I think it will be at some point. I'm one of those people. I would absolutely love to believe in it. I would love to experience it right now in the way that I was hoping it would be, and have it be like a life-changing experience. I have an Oculus Rift at home that I got after the expo, or a previous show several years ago, that shall not be named, and it's exciting. You put it on for the first time, and you can look all around, and you feel like you're in that world. It's really immersive. Down to the point where about 20 minutes in, and I've got a raging headache, and I feel vaguely nauseated, and it's just hardware limitations. Everything is a little crunchy looking in the view. It's not very high res. I can't quite make out the needles on my gauges. These things are all changing, and I imagine in a couple years this will be funny to look back on because it'll be so amazing.
You still can't drink your coffee while you have that on your head either.
You cannot. No, I don't recommend it. But that's one of those sort of big picture areas that I'm sure there'll be a lot of improvement in, and could potentially be a game changer. But honestly, most of the stuff that I'm excited about is stuff that would put most people to sleep. I would love better mesh editing tools. That would make me so happy. And I would love if PBR were more strictly adhered to and were more full featured in both the major platforms. And I know these are all things that are being worked on. They're things that will make my life easier. My life is not your average swimmer's life, and probably you should be very thankful for that.
Yeah, so what I'm most excited about is really a trend that's been going on for, pretty much as long as computing has been around, which is the continuous exponentially increasing computational performance that we have, especially the stuff that we're getting in GPUs these days. Because my dream is that everybody has a 60-core machine that can shade 1 trillion triangles with any kind of complicated shader that I'm throwing at it, because that really is a lot of the limitation that we have when developing aircraft add-ons, is we pretty much have to cut the thing down to the lowest common denominator. We have to look at our market and say, okay, we're going to serve 90% of those, and so what's the lowest hardware that 90% of people have? And that's pretty much where we go. Now, there are things you can do in terms of like scaling performance, but ultimately, I want to be able to do your in-flight entertainment system back in the cabin, but that's a separate computer effectively in the real world. But if your machine has enough horsepower to drive, draw every blade of grass, why not? I'm gonna draw an entertainment system in the back, and I'm gonna draw, separate synthetic vision systems on the main avionics, and I'm gonna do basically everything I can to stress out as much of that hardware as I can. Now in X-Plane, these days they're working on Vulkan integration, so that's going to unlock a little bit more of the potential that we have in hardware right now, but I'm looking forward. I want to see a machine that has 10 times, 100 times the computational performance that we have right now, because then I can just go wild.
Maybe a question on that. Something I wondered. Do you think that if you put 80% of the details inside of an airplane, the last 20% become invisible? In terms of 3D modeling and texturing.
Yeah, but I don't think really that we are quite there yet where we could say that we are getting diminishing returns. We still do, you still do occasionally look at the occasional add-on. You see like crunchy lines along like a smoothened edge, which in a real aircraft would be like a smooth nacelle. And you can still see triangles. So I think we're still not quite there yet. And yeah, one of the things that we have to consider, especially with Bill next to me here, is thinking about we cannot, in the aircraft itself, we can't eat up all the performance that you have available because we got to leave something for the guys around us. I can't design an aircraft that's just going to be 5 million triangles and shading so complicated that the CPU is going to, or the GPU is going to chug. So I got to leave enough there so that other people's products are going to be able to shine through and not really impact performance so hard.
So switching gears again, so if you can share, maybe you're announcing it today, hint, hint, right? He's acting oblivious, but something's happening with the guy here. But What's something that you've wanted to do, a product or a project that was limited by the limitations of a platform that you would like to create? And if it's still that way, what could change that and make it possible for you?
Oh, weather radar. We're working on X-Plane, and X-Plane's, like, I'm going to be a little bit harsh here and dishing out some harsh truth, but X-Plane's atmosphere sucks. There's none of it there. I mean, it's basically like 3 pieces of data that sort of X-Plane imagines what the atmosphere is looking like. And I'm actually trying to write, we have the engine for an actual weather radar that does raycasting and, you know, proper coverage and reflection computations, and then all of a sudden you get into, like, cool, we have this great engine, and now you hit a wall because all of a sudden all X-Plane gives you is like one picture, and you're trying to, like, the way that we're actually doing it right now is absolutely Stone Age. My dream of one day is X-Plane actually having a proper atmospheric model that develops over time. It's not just a static picture. And then actually that will impact the training environment quite significantly. At that point, we'll have our radar engine right there, ready to take advantage of it. But right now, we have basically a Ferrari that's running on, like, bike wheels. It's just great. We have a great engine, just no way to put the power down.
And, you know, and the scenery adjunct to that is things like, I'd love to have a more dynamic world. I'd like to have a world where things changed over time, because we have the 3Ds. We have those 3 dimensions, right? Everything is locked down pretty good. They look realistic. But as I mentioned earlier with the whole issue with Portland, things don't really work in 4 dimensions. You don't have the time dimension built in. And I would love to have something where you could, like, feed the sim data on, like, a stream, where as things get built or as things change, as they close a runway to do, you know, to pave or to do an extension, it would show up closed in the sim, and you'd basically have construction equipment around and all that.
So I guess, you know, that's really an interesting thought. Like you talk about a 4th dimension. Do you think that is it that there's no way to do that, or that you would have to create a way to do it from a data provider or something like that?
Well, there are ways to do some parts of it, but you're basically still not working in the 4th. You're working in doing incremental little updates and pushing them. It's a lot of work to do, and I guess it probably always will be. But it would be so cool if the sim could have a stream of information, just like it does for weather or for, you know, AI traffic and that sort of thing. If there's a stream of, like, the conditions on the ground, what was being worked on, what was open, what was closed, what new buildings have cropped up, things like that.
I think FSX on its own was a limitation. Still is today, in some respect. There are a lot of things that the platform was developed to do, and there are a lot of things the platform was clearly not developed to do. And I'm pretty sure if there's anyone from the ACES team here from Microsoft that worked on this thing, they probably didn't imagine the platform would be like it is today when they developed it. A lot of it, I'm so glad that Lockheed picked it up and make it what it is today. Well, in a sense, maybe we'd all be on X-Plane right now. Who knows? There are a lot of issues that we face during development of anything in this community, and that's, like, platform agnostic. On any platform, you'll have limitations. It's kind of part of the game, and the more you can build outside, if you have a concept you want to build outside of the simulator and just kind of connect just because you need that data, it's easy to develop. And when you start to integrate weather into the mix, the weather radar is kind of the best example you can have. It's trying to fetch data from the sim, and the sim is like, no, not getting it.
Well, to explain the specific issue is more like there's none of it there. Like, there's nothing to get.
Yeah, well, that's a limiting factor on its own. So there are multiple things we have to go around, but it's kind of the part of the deal. And I think that if we're all here right now, it's because we kind of accepted that those were there and just accepted the fact that we need to go around those and find solution for those. That's kind of part of the challenge.
I would definitely agree with weather radar. Having the ability that a controller says, hey, you have moderate precipitation, 12 o'clock, 5 miles, that correlates with what's actually in the simulator. That would be really cool. So that's definitely a limitation. P3D not supporting 8.33 frequency spacing is a big problem because Europe uses that and X-Plane uses it. So if you P3D people, please support 8.33. By the way, that's the third digit in the frequency for those that are not familiar. It allows more frequencies to be used. US is on 25, which they already support that, and that was the standard 10 years ago, I think, and they've moved past that. So anyway, the other thing, and scenery would be really nice if all the scenery developers had the runways in the same place and the taxiways, so you don't have somebody taxiing on the grass, you know. But you know, that's the gateway. X-Plane Gateway really helps in that equation. I love that because people can go in and update those. Yeah.
That comes with a trade-off too. There are hot air balloons in Montreal.
Really?
Next to the runway. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. For the scenery gateway?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Hot air balloons, like they're in the air. There are a few of them parked next to the runway. Yeah. It's all kinds of crazy. But it's much better in terms of layout, though. Layout is good now. I agree with that.
So maybe following up a bit on Matt's comment here about the database, I think from our perspective, updating the navigational database within P3D and X-Plane it wasn't really meant for updates in this regard. We have some projects going on, but it's not as straightforward as within X-Plane, for example, where this has been modeled in a different way. So this is a limitation that we're working on.
So you guys are talking about hardware limitations, right? So there's obviously VR where, you know, I was a Vive user. I was a pretty early Vive adopter. I tried it. I liked the idea. I actually didn't get a headache from it. The problem for me was the simulators weren't pushing enough for me on high-end hardware to get what I needed to do that properly. So is there something that is happening right now in terms of optimizing that could get us there right now or soon?
So in X-Plane, the primary sort of driving force for improving rendering, essentially you're talking about rendering performance, and the primary driving factor there is they want to be used in Vulkan to essentially unload the single-threaded pipeline limitation that is right now in OpenGL, because OpenGL it's a product of the 90s. You can clearly, pretty much of the 80s, because you can clearly see it was never ever designed with its internals to ever drive more than one CPU. And all of a sudden we have machines that have dozens of them. So now what do we do? So clearly that is one way to improve performance. Another thing though is even if we completely unblocked the CPU side of the pipeline, if we optimize the ever-loving crap out of the thing, still I'm pretty sure if we wanted to get to sort of the resolutions that to be able to see the instruments clearly and to be able to see the environment clearly, there's just not the hardware right now to be able to drive it. Like, you probably have to run multi-GPU or some sort of thing, because if you want to have a 5K resolution per eye, drive that at 90 FPS, there's just no hardware out there to do that right now. So clearly there's going to have to be improvements in just pure silicon. We do need a lot of that. Hopefully they're going to be able to provide that.
RTX on.
Yeah, well, if you want frame rates, you definitely want RTX off.
I have nothing to say.
What was the question?
Basically, is there something on the software side of Flight Sim that could be improved substantially in terms of, well, for VR, but also for like performance in general, right? To get those
immersion,
yeah. My God. We're stuck with platforms that, well, it's kind of a good and a bad, right? We're stuck with platforms that have been designed and architected, is that a word? Like over a decade ago. And that's kind of required for what we do, because with the complexity of a simulator, you kind of have to build it, and that just takes time. But we see new platforms, all the new platforms that are coming on, you see DCS, you see Airfly. Those are built on modern engines, and you run those on VR, and it's absolutely marvelous. But you get into complex sim like X-Plane and P3D that have been developed a very long time ago. Now X-Plane is kind of being transferred to Vulkan, which I think is going to help tremendously. And I hope P3D kind of follows those footsteps and kind of rewrites parts of its engine for performance, for VR. Yeah, I don't know that there's much we can do. I think it's just a matter of generations.
I'm just going to interject quickly here before they give this a shot. But in about 5 minutes, if you guys have questions, you can line up in the middle of the room, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions.
There's no April Fool's joke.
If I can add real quick, if you're going to come and line up, please go to the sides and to the back. Do not cut in front of the stage, please.
I would say getting off of SimConnect for P3D would be really nice. I know there's some other options, but X-Plane is more versatile of what you can get out of the simulator. So our client for P3D is strictly SimConnect. It would be nice to have some alternative options that are better. And hardware, I mean the server software, it would be nice if you zoom in from a far distance that we could still transmit like a 15 hertz update rate. But it's kind of limiting because if you have 50 of those airplanes and you're trying to do that, your sim's going to crash. So
we're not really limited by the simulator.
Maybe mobile devices. Do you see a performance difference with mobile devices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the mobile devices, the tablets have improved tremendously over the past years. So, I mean, what we can do now is tremendously increased performance compared to a few years back. The resolution, just having retina screens, making charts, for example, look amazing. This is definitely a huge improvement. So, of course, hardware outside of the simulator, we're really dependent on. Yep.
So kind of one more topic before we get into questions is what kind of advice can you offer to the people attending FlightSimExpo and those who, maybe they're new to flight sim or they're experienced, but what should they do to get the most out of the conference and out of their sim?
They should walk around, talk to us. That's, I mean, just having conversations, talking about how you're simming, how you're using products, what you would like to see in the future. I mean, this is the essence of this conference. So just dialogue in the booth. So yeah.
as I said before, every idea that we have or feature has come from people suggesting something. So having suggestions is super important. And don't be me. Don't sit in your booth all day and walk around. I mean, I never get to enjoy this conference fully because I am always sitting in the booth. But you guys have the opportunity to hit every booth and talk to everybody. I would say don't waste too much time at each one. Spend a good managed time at each booth and listen to the developers and suggest things.
Be in the right seat room at 1:25 p.m.
You know, I'd say this is one of those rare opportunities you really don't get very often where you can sit face to face and talk to developers, fellow simmers, people who are really into the hobby, not through a forum, not online, but in an actual, real meet space environment here where we can talk to each other. So just if there's anything that you would like us to do, if there's anything you want to know, if there's any problem you've been having that's been bothering you for ages and you haven't been able to get a good answer on a forum, go to that developer and talk to them. We absolutely love talking to you, each and every one of you, and we'd love to hear anything you've got to say, positive or negative. It's much better to be able to connect face to face, and then you find out your answers and you go back and you tell all your friends that you do see face to face, I talked to the developer and here's what they told me, and you get a sense of who we are as people and we get to know who you are, and it makes the whole hobby better, I think.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. Everybody else has already made all my points.
All right, so do we have some folks in the middle here?
Hey, Will.
Hello.
What?
Go ahead.
Oh, so hey guys, my name is Nick. I'm with FS Elite, and my question is, with all these advancements that the sim has been bringing, like PBR and that sort of stuff, do you think some of the sim is actually advancing faster than the hardware is capable of producing? So like, if the performance we're able, or the stuff we're able to create is not able to be, or the hardware is not able to keep up with what we're able to create, that sort of stuff.
So I can only talk about the major platforms that I know about, which is primarily XPlane, but I know a little bit of P3D, and I'd say hardware is actually advancing much faster than the software is capable of utilizing it right now, at least in the major sims. Some other projects maybe not, but I see the hardware has enormous amount of reserve power that we're just not tapping into because of, I wouldn't call it fundamentally bad software design, it's more like limited because of the age of the platforms. So it takes time to re-architect software, much longer than it takes time to buy new hardware. And I think there's definitely room for improvement on the hardware we already have. And it's pretty much, I can see it moving away faster than we're able to catch up right now. So there's going to have to be software changes, a lot of them.
And before he goes for it, I think that to add on to that, it's really because Flight Sim is unique in that we have our own challenges, and a lot of, you know, like AAA developers and studios, they have proprietary engines and they have all these modern accelerating tools that we don't have. So,
you know, I think for the longest time, having started, 15 plus years ago doing this, for the longest time, it really felt like the simulator, the software behind the sims was overdriving the hardware in the hope that the hardware would catch up at some point. And I feel like maybe it's because I've been dealing with products like FSX that are getting so old now, so the hardware like more than caught up with the software. But lately, I've had the feeling that it is, like you said, the other way around, where the software is struggling to catch up now. Because honestly, I hit a lot of situations when I'm simming, just in my development, my testing, where I think something should slow down the sim, and it's just flying. And my rig is not the latest and greatest hardware, but I'm just not having that many tech issues with the hardware anymore. So,
I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out, right? So just look at the frequencies of CPUs. How much extra gigahertz have we put on in the last 7-8 years? Almost none, like maybe a quarter. But how many extra cores have we put on? Oh man, we're talking 3 or 4 times more performance.
I don't have anything.
it's okay. You're chasing planes, right? So it's all good, right?
All right, good morning. I'm Brad Faviles from Jacksonville area. I have a two-part question. This is probably more on the management corporate side. So one of the things is, what's the relationship between the big companies and your add-ons? Is that a good relationship? Is it difficult? And then a follow-up question to that would be, as users of the simulators, one of the things that at least me I'm concerned about is the continuity of the add-ons long-term, and I'm talking maybe 5-10 years in the future. When I buy an add-on, I want to make sure that it will be supported and it'll continue for years to come. I don't want to buy it and then all of a sudden the company goes away because the developer moved on to other things. So what's your strategy as a company to move forward?
I can answer the first question. You asked about large companies in relationship to the add-ons, right? From our perspective, we're delivering data from the real aviation industry to the simulation community. So here, the essential component is this relationship we have with companies in the industry. Jeppesen now being our provider, having them on board with what we're doing is really the driving force to continuing development and listening to. I mean, we're having a good relationship with the simmers. The community is one aspect of this puzzle. The other aspect is the other end, where we have this interface towards the aviation industry. So having a good relationship on both ends is really, really essential. The second question I'll leave for someone else.
Because talking about the first question of how do we actually interact with the I think you mean the main platform vendors, right? So basically, people who are making the simulator itself. I can only speak for X-Plane, and I'd say Laminar is extremely receptive to feedback. They might not always be, they might not always do changes that we want, but overall, like I've had many a phone call with them where we're working interactively through a problem, and they are quite helpful in that. In terms of long-term support, it's kind of a complicated question because you really have to view the simulator, at least the main platforms, you have to really view them less as a single product and more as an operating system. They're just an operating environment that has a bunch of base features, that has a basic API for interacting with third-party software, and then we have a whole ton of third-party software running on top. Like I've never seen anybody, I'm pretty sure nobody here at the conference is running their simulator vanilla, just purely the way it comes out of the box. Everybody's got a crap load of plugins and add-ons on it. And there, it's really up to we have a sort of plan to support the product for a certain amount of time, but if somebody pulls out the rug from under us and changes the API fundamentally such that it breaks an existing add-on, then the only suggestion I can give you there is just don't update the simulator. Run the software that you got it with, and then you'll be able to run it for pretty much all eternity. But it's an unfortunate reality. If you want to have extra features, you got to do some breakage at some point. We can't support software 20 years into the past while still getting new features. It just doesn't work like that. The software will be completely unwieldy at that point. I mean, look at Windows.
FSX.
Yeah, especially FSX. I want to address that because I understand the need to try, you've got an investment in add-ons. You want them to last for a while. You want to be able to enjoy them for years. But if you bought, for instance, a scenery for FSX, it's still going to work in FSX. If it worked before, it'll work now, as long as you haven't added more add-ons to your FSX that break it. But just because you're still using FSX, not you obviously particularly, but it doesn't mean that the numbers of people using FSX are still going to support future development for it. So at some point, every company has to decide, okay, it's time to sunset a particular platform and move it aside and focus on the new tech, just so we can keep delivering interesting new products that have the new tech that people are really clamoring for. And that means necessarily putting some of the old stuff beside and letting it sort of fade into the background.
I think we've seen it with the P3D switch from 32 to 64-bit. It was kind of the worst possible scenario for everyone was freaking out. It was like the, in 2000 when they thought every computer would crash at the turn of the year. That was kind of it, right? Didn't really happen. Well, yeah, it did break a lot of add-ons, but most of the important ones got transferred over, and the developers were kind of ready for that to happen as well. And it was a good transition. So I guess if you have a good user base for an add-on, the chances of it being updated down the road are much higher, unless of course the developer is no longer able to update it. It's not something I'm particularly worried about, but I can understand how people can be worried about that kind of thing, specifically for kind of niche add-on and stuff that we want, but might not be super mainstream. But yeah. Yeah.
And if no one else has anything to add to that, I would say you're talking about the relationship between the big, you say the big company, it's really the main developer supporting the base, right? Because in Flight Sim, it's really different where you have the main companies are the base, but everything else is these people and all the people that are in that hall. All the people that are in that hall make that all come together. I don't think anyone in this room would, unless all your goal is to go on X-Plane and fly a 172 to get your PPL and do nothing else, that your goal is to simply get a flight sim and that's all you're gonna do. Because of that relationship between the big three or whatever you want to call it and all of these people, it's possible. As far as support, I like what you guys said about the transition from 32 to 64-bit. I came in right after that, so I was lucky, but it seemed like it was a painful process.
Yeah, you have to really view these platforms more like operating systems with software running on top. Nobody buys an operating system to run solitaire till the end of time. We actually purchase some useful software that we want to run on top.
Windows XP, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm getting back into simming, and I've noticed that the structure of the community has gotten a lot more complex. It's pretty hard to get into and figure out what's the right things to do. So as developers, what are your thoughts on how to structure the community in a way that will lend itself to increasing the community, which may help with the real-world pilot shortage, I feel?
I think it's actually the other way around. The pilot shortage is driving people in the community. Training on Flight Simulator has like exploded in the past few years. It's way cheaper to fly now on sims than just to rent a real plane and fly. So a lot of just trainee pilot will be flying on simulators. When I did my PPL, I said that to my instructor. I was like, I did a lot of flight sim. He was not buying it. But then I got out at 45 hours, which is the minimum requirements in Canada. So flight sim really, really helps to train you. It also gives you bad habits, and that's kind of what flight training is for. But it really, really helps. So I think a lot of influx of people inside of this community, and I think part of the reason why this event is so big nowadays is in part because of flight simulation training. And it got people in.
I could probably answer a lot of this one. I fly next to a captain, and he's like, we'll come into New York, and he's like, I said, I pre-tuned the frequency, and he's like, how did you know that? And I'm like, well, I don't really go into detail. But I'm like, I just, I read their SOP. He's like, you read what? Yeah, the N90 SOP, I read it. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity with the pilot shortage, absolutely. I think there's a case study you could do on most of these people that, younger guys that have gone through the ranks from flying online, and maybe they still continue to do it, but not failing check rides. I mean, these guys, one of the guys at our booth is at Envoy right now. He's never failed a check ride. He's like the perfect candidate because of Flight Sim. I'm convinced it's because of Flight Sim. And there's a lot of those people now that you could actually go back and look at them and say, these guys are saving the airline a lot of money. So Flight Sim is absolutely huge for it. Just don't talk about it too much while you fly.
It's kind of a can of worms, right?
It gets a little weird.
Yeah.
They're like, you do what?
Yeah. What, for fun?
Yeah. You do what at home?
Not in P3D, right? Not for fun.
You can't.
Hi guys, my name is Taylor. I'm an Envoy Airlines cadet from Austin, longtime simmer. My question is for the whole panel, but particularly for those of you that maybe don't have as much of an aviation background or were coming from a different career. What is the most unique challenge to develop for the aviation community as opposed to maybe just the traditional, more gaming community? And what are some of the quirks and aspects that you've had to learn as you've been developing for a very unique kind of niche market?
So I'm not from the aviation community, or I'm not simmer or pilot, but we develop tools for navigation. In this aspect, I mean, it's a game, but it's very serious. There are so many protocols, for example, and rules, regulations regarding navigation that you could see it as a limitation, but it's also a good structure. I mean, it's a set of rules how you are due to perform certain aspects of a flight. That it's a common language that pilots speak. So this is it's sort of a limitation that you can't do anything in a navigation app, but it's also a nice set of standards and rules that sort of can guide you towards an app or a system that is still understandable, even though it's maybe new, has cool features, but it still has this core set of rules that makes it understandable. So I mean, I come from a different domain, But since aviation has this really strict way of performing pretty much every task, it's easy to actually understand the process. So this has helped me. I'm still not able to fly, but I definitely understand how a pilot workflow is.
You're seated next to the regulation itself. You're seated next to the regulation itself.
Right.
Balancing realism versus going to take out the trash. That's an important balance that you have to achieve. How realistic do you really want it to be? I mean, can you leave the cockpit and go make dinner? I mean, those are things you have to balance. And so you can't be totally realistic, that's for sure.
I know, coming from a completely non-aviation background, although I've always loved aircraft and always been really interested in them, when you come into it through a scenery doorway, you're basically, when you start, I think an awful lot of us are just into it because we like the graphics. We like to do interesting art and all that. And that'll take you up to a point. You can do a few small bush airports or whatever and be pretty loosey-goosey with how things are laid out. But when you start working up into the international airport range, I've really had to be on my toes because we got some seriously pedantic people in this community who will hold you to every little, the spacing of the lines, and everything has to be there. You make sure every taxiway sign is there. So I've had to learn an awful lot about the technicalities of putting together airports. It's been an education for sure.
Spacing of taxi lights and stuff like that.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you had an unanswered question, these guys will all be around the floor. And if I could just get a round of applause for their time, but also FlightSimExpo.